Bonjour.
Good morning. I would first like to thank our Chief Andrew Delisle for the benediction and the blessing this morning and the prayer this morning. Mr. Delisle is part of the generation before me, and so he was a Grand Chief for the First Nations of Kahnawake, but he was also part of an important delegation of Aboriginal leaders who welcomed all the countries that participated in the Olympic Games in Montreal. And he was the representative of his nations and the representative of the First Nations for Quebec and Labrador. The irony of all that is that Mr. Delisle's talk is one that I am moving forward. He talked, of course, about the people before him, and he would carry that message forward, and I'm carrying his message forward. And all of these messages that we're carrying forward are becoming, I'm hoping, more and more constructive and are no longer just discourse of reaction, but of proaction. I am an Inuit before I became the chief of the Quebec and Labrador First Nations and my original community summit. For those of you who don't know your geography, the summit is between Bécomo and Forestville on the north coast.
Kahagat, Waham Royan the Jeep Shish, the Bazmustadawut, Dewijiat, Mark Chegwan Gahagat Bequendamat. The Tredabwe Kohagun, Dainan, Kohagun and them Edam Zuyat. Il y a quelques années,
a few years ago, I was participating in an event in Wandaki, which is outside of Quebec, with the person who was the mayor of Quebec at the time, André Boucher, and they were saying, she was saying actually very clearly and candidly and frankly to all that when she was younger, they had taught her that the history of Quebec and Canada had started at 1534 when Jacques Cartier arrived. And very humbly she was saying, later I learned that there was a whole history prior to that history that we were taught. And I think that's the first important point I'd like to bring up today as we move towards the 2017 celebrations. The Inuit language is still spoken by about 65% of our population, and that's about 20,000 people in Quebec and Labrador. Unfortunately, that does not apply to all the Aboriginal languages throughout the country. So it is probably in this language, or one that resembled this one, that my ancestors actually welcomed your ancestors about 5 centuries ago. Our people have a tradition of hospitality and respect. But many of us consider now that our policies of immigration at the time would have been better off if they were less flexible. Certain observers who are even more severe than that tell us that we shared so much that we have nothing left. But of course, that's part of a different debate. There is no doubt that many First Nations were here in North America before Christophe Colomb and before Jacques Cartier's expeditions. And for most of the First Nations, their presence on this island of the Turtle, or America, is more like 6,000 to 10,000 years. And I'm not going to have a fight over a few thousand years. But so 150 years of history says Canada is very young. But there was a huge history before that one, a history that we don't talk about, the one of our people who named every waterway, every mountain, every lake, and every season. And these First Nations who were in this country, thousands of years before Jacques Cartier, allowed the establishment of the New France colony. They were the ones who created and constructed and built what today we call Canada. To speak of Canada and to underscore these 150 years without actually mentioning the history before this one, the one that I was taught, the one that I learned, would be a huge mistake. The First Nations were the sovereign nations, and this is confirmed by many treaties, and in 1763 also by the Royal Proclamation, which is still today a document that is in our Constitution. So the sovereignty, even through all of the ups and downs, has survived the times. Moving to 2017, I can only think about October this year, which is actually the 250th year anniversary of the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And this is the document that confirms specific rights for our people and the obligation of the Crown to deal with us and respect and abide by these rights. The decisions of the Supreme Court of Canada mentions regularly this Royal Proclamation. And therefore, we should not be surprised that the First Nations, when they interpret their relationship with the Crown, consider the Royal Proclamation as the only document that actually recognized and respected them, something that is missing today. And we should not think that this was an abdication on the part of our people to the Crown, because the results that we had with the different governments certainly did not allow us to do otherwise. But Canada can certainly say that it was perhaps one of the first countries that recognized the realities of our people. And we have to recognize, therefore, that Canada was perhaps one of the first countries that ended up with a constitution in which it recognized the distinct character of our peoples and therefore allowed their respect and recognition for their ancestral laws. And I'm sure that that is what history will remember over and above what happened before and what should happen in the future. I think that all of us together here will have a very important role to play. And what will happen as of now is that we should actually challenge a political will that is often absent. Section 35 of this Constitution is dedicated to our people, and it took a lot of effort to get it there. Our leaders at the time, and Chief Delisle, beyond the diversity that they represented, rallied together to make sure that there would always be recognition of their historical treaty and recognition of the territories where they have a right and they have Aboriginal rights. So we had a huge mobilization at the time with the results that we see today. Nevertheless, what very few people know, or maybe have forgotten, is that the country owes us a third constitutional conference, which had to deal with the implementation of ancestral laws and treaties and create the basis for an autonomous Aboriginal government. And the conferences that were supposed to allow us to do that unfortunately failed. And that is why we have all these challenges to face today. We have to search for a government that will have the courage to actually take that constitutional process in hand again and lead it to success. So we need special and major changes for our Aboriginal communities, and of course we can accomplish some of that ourselves with the energy that many of our members have and invest in many initiatives to demonstrate their identity, and also because they really want a collective positive future for their nation. With proaction rather than reaction, Quebec is a very rich society and considers itself progressive. So how can you explain what is happening in many communities? Because according to the Development Index of the UN, Canada is amongst the 10 first countries of the world, but now it has dropped to the 60th rank if we look at the social and economic status of the Aboriginal people. This is not the Canada that our young are dreaming of. There is still some progress in some sectors. In others, the situation is actually getting worse. So the challenge is a huge one. In conclusion, and to follow through with what André Boucher said, the mayor of Quebec, I would say that 2017 should give us the opportunity to broaden and include the realities of the Aboriginal people in it. And it is a challenge that I am launching here, independent of all our responsibilities and our occupations and irrelevant of our origins as well and our backgrounds. In 2017, in Montreal, as in everywhere else in Quebec, we are hoping that we will have the opportunity to bring forward some of the points I've just brought up. I think that the Aboriginal issue often makes people uncomfortable, the whole issue of the First Nations. And as the political will is often full of potholes, I see that our best ambassadors are the people who are members of our First Nations and who are artists and express, therefore, through their art, through their drawing, through their songs, and other means, what they feel. And our dream, therefore, for 2017 is to have a venue where we can express that here in Montreal. Our project is to establish, therefore, a cultural and artistic center for Aboriginal art in Montreal that would be able to showcase our work, just like the botanical gardens. It gives us that possibility. And that is my dream here today that I'm sharing with you. Thank you very much.
Je garde Monsieur Picard à mes côtés pour une petite question.
Mr. Picard, let me just ask you a question. I was listening to you. How is it that despite all of this reality and despite all this, you're still such an optimist? Are you, in fact, an optimist? Every time I open my eyes in the morning, I ask myself that question. And the answer, I think, is quite simple. I would say that you can't give up. Our population is a very young population. Those under 25 represent 55% of our population in most of our communities. So this is a responsibility that we have and that we're going to transfer to others to make sure that we continue to have a progressive outlook. It also, of course, requires commitment on the part of everyone, which is one that we have difficulty getting. We have the impression, more often than not, that that will and that commitment is only one way. Thank you very much.